To the people that are watching this is Hothead here. I'm editing this podcast, and just to let you know, there is no video. The video quality and something with the audio got messed up. This is just the audio version. Please enjoy.
Two. All right.
Here we go. Karatekast, episode 4?
Episode 4. It's our fourth podcast.
Episode 4. Wow. That's crazy.
So we've been technically doing this for 4 weeks.
Kinda.
Yeah, because it came out weekly.
Yeah.
But this is a special episode.
It is a special episode.
With our first guest.
Yeah, guest star, Kyoshi Carol.
Yes.
Kiyoshi,
huh?
Kiyoshi.
I'm so honored, guys, to be your very first guest on your amazing podcast. So thank you for having me.
Of course. So we're just gonna have her, we're gonna ask her questions, and she's gonna give her history of the martial arts and kind of where she started out and how she got to where she is today.
Yep.
So
and I have a lot of history because I'm old AF.
We're allowed to say that.
I know.
Okay.
I said AF.
Well, wait, first off, we call you Kyoshi Carol because Kiyoshi is your rank. Can you, how many stripes is that?
Oh my gosh, that's 7 stripes, my friend. So it starts out with, of course, white belt, and then you move through the colored ranks, and then you get your black belt. And most systems have different names for their black belts. They have different names for all kinds of things. You have, in Kung Fu, you have Sifu, you have Sensei. A lot of Korean systems, it's just Mr. or Miss. So this is very special. So you have in our system, which is Hawaiian Kempo, you have Sensei, you have Shihan, you have Kiyoshi, and then you have Hanshi, which is Grandmaster. I don't really think we use Hanshi. I think we just basically call people Grandmaster, or we call them Sensei because they're so old they don't want to be called anything else. They're just kind of used to that. So this last year in 2019, I got my 7th degree in Hawaiian Kempo, which is pretty
amazing.
Cool. And when did you start doing Hawaiian Kempo?
Well, I started doing Hawaiian Kempo when I was 21, but I started doing martial arts when I was 14. I started out in the Chuck Norris system in Los Angeles back in the 80s because I was a real jerk. I mean, I was all hairband, punk rock. I was all just little madness surfer girl. And I got in a fight with these 2 girls. I just got beat up. And my mom said, well, if you're going to be a jerk, then you better learn how to fight because you don't know how to fight. Even though you think you do, you really don't. And I really, really didn't. So she took me to the school down the street. And fortunately, it was a great guy. Chuck and Aaron Norris were originally the owners of this school. They owned quite a few martial arts schools in the San Fernando Valley where I grew up. And this was one of them, and it had been bought by a gentleman named Bill Parent, who used to fight with Chuck Norris on the Chuck Norris team.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he was an incredible martial artist, Mr. Parent, but I don't think he had ever trained a girl before. I just don't think I had never seen a girl martial artist. And as long as I trained there, I had never seen another girl, not even little girls. So it was just me and a bunch of dudes, like police officers and firefighters and military guys, and here I was, all 100 pounds, all 5'5", and they were just these giant guys, and not a one of them wanted me there. And then I kind of realized I left that school for just different reasons when I got my black belt and moved on. And then eventually I went to Master Cecil Peoples, and I went there because his wife was such a badass fighter, and she was so good. And being a woman back then, nobody actually taught me anything. Basically, you would show up and they would just kind of brush you aside.
Yeah.
If I had a question about something, I remember being in a class once at another karate school, actually a karate school that I owned. And I asked my boyfriend, who was my partner, a question, and he walked by me and ignored me.
Wow.
And went on to answer somebody else's question. And so I just kind of had to learn how I learned. And then Master Nomi Peoples was, I saw her and I said, God, look at what you're doing. I've never seen anything like this. There was no jiu-jitsu back then, at least none that I had seen. And she was doing crazy stuff, and she was tossing people and doing judo. I had never seen anything like this. And she was only maybe 5 feet, and just a wrecking machine.
Awesome.
And I went over there and I saw what they were doing, and I was like, this is it. I have found my home. And that was it. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
And this was in the 80s? Oh, no, this is years has passed by.
I had only been training in Hawaiian Kempo for a year before I actually moved to Colorado.
Okay.
But I had been training that whole time in an art called Tangsudo, which is the Chuck Norris system. So this was, I started training in the early to mid 80s before I moved to Colorado. But growing up in California was just crazy back then because it was all martial arts.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool. Let's go back. You said you owned a karate school?
I did when I was 18 years old.
That's insane.
I was stupid. I mean, my sweet parents, they were so sweet. And, I decided I graduated high school. I didn't want to go to college. And I was dating this guy who appeared to be a nice enough guy. He was one of the top martial art point fighters in California. He was very good looking, like Richard Gere, at least I thought so. He was quite a bit older than me. I was 18 and he was 30, 32 maybe. I don't know. He was old, way too old for me.
Yeah.
But we kind of hit it off, and I thought, well, he's kind of a cool guy. He's a cute guy. He could train me. Never really trained me. But he wanted to open a karate school, and I was like, I want to do this too. So basically, we opened a karate school, and we got some great students, like 20 of them, and then that's all we had, and it didn't work. We didn't gel, he and I. So it kind of went that way.
Right.
But it was a great learning experience. It was an amazing learning experience because some of the greatest experiences you get in this life is what you don't get. Then you realize, well, that didn't work, so I can do this. Mm-hmm. And that's how that went down. So yeah, I did have a karate school. It failed miserably.
Well, you tried.
I did. And really, that's kind of what you have to do, especially when you're young. You just keep swinging. And eventually, something's going to hit. But if you don't try, nothing's ever going to happen. Nothing. Right. You can just sit in your basement. And that's how that went.
Well, California, what made you move all the way to Colorado then?
Love, baby, love. It was my husband. I saw this guy. So this is kind of funny. The guy that I was with who owned the karate school, he turned out not to be a nice guy. He turned out to be a pretty bad guy.
Yeah.
And there was some abuse there. There was some physical abuse. And Sensei Cecil, who is, all of our instructors, this guy broke into my house. And not Sensei Cecil, the bad guy.
Oh,
this guy broke into my house and went crazy and accused me of all kinds of things. And I ran to try to get away, and he knocked me out cold, punched me in the back of the head, and knocked me out cold. And I woke up and I ran across the street, called Sensei Cecil. He came over. He was driving a school bus back then. He came over to my house, drove over, and proceeded to tell Ron in so many words, don't ever touch her again. Right. If you do, you will, how can I put this? You will be not happy.
Right.
And he, and then a year later, I moved to Colorado because Sensei Cecil said, you date bad guys. You don't know how to do this. You date bad guys. So why don't you let me fix you up with somebody?
Right.
And he goes, I know a guy in Colorado. And I had heard of Chuck Cordova. He was a very, very big time point fighter and also a great kickboxer. I'd seen him on ESPN.
What?
Yeah. And he was all kinds of badass. And I remember seeing him, and I was like, that guy's hot. So we introduced us, and that was it. It was love. So love brought me out here.
That's amazing. And then you guys obviously have a thriving karate school.
Yeah.
Well, this one works.
Yeah.
This one works.
No, I love it. That's
Definitely
amazing.
works.
Yeah.
Definitely works.
It was great growing up, though, in Los Angeles because at that time, It was really, kind of the golden age of point sparring.
Right.
Point sparring was different back then. You had legends, absolute legends that were point sparring. You had Benny Urquidez, who went on to be probably the most successful kickboxer ever.
Yeah.
Maybe the greatest of all time. He was a points fighter in California. He was one of Sensei Bill's students.
Oh, yeah.
Benny Urquidez and all Benny's brothers were his students. You had guys like Ray Sua out there, who was this explosive nightmare of a fighter. You had Ed Parker, who discovered Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
I knew these guys. I knew Ed Parker. He knew me. I remember sitting at the internationals when they were setting up the internationals in Long Beach. Back then, it was one of the biggest tournaments in the world.
Long Beach.
And I was sitting there, and Ed Parker was sitting 2 rows down from me, and I thought I could ask Mr. Parker anything. So I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, "Mr. Parker, can I ask you a question?" He had this deep voice. He goes, "Yes, of course, Carol. What would you like?" And I said, "Did Elvis really put a hit on Mike Stone?" Because Ed Parker used to teach Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, yes, Carol, he did." And then he went on to tell me this whole story about Elvis was going to kill Mike Stone for sleeping with his wife. Yeah. It was crazy.
I didn't know any of that. That's insane.
Benny the Jet.
Yep.
That guy.
I mean, these guys, Cecil Peoples these guys were legends, and I got to see like the tail end of them. Then I got to see this whole rise of some amazing martial artists out there. It was the golden age, and these guys were fighting, especially that era before me, they were fighting a lot more like mixed martial arts fights now. Some of them didn't even use gear.
Right.
They just had these nothing little pads like that would cover their hands to here, like up to their knuckles. And most of the time they didn't wear foot pads. There was no headgear. There was no mouthpiece.
That's right.
And we would fight on hardwood and cement. That's what you'd fight on. That's what I fought on.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Crazy stuff.
It was.
Well, speaking of that, how was point fighting now, and then point fighting back then? What was different? Obviously, what you just said, hardwood, barely any pads, but was the rules the same? Was it still like that sideways stance and everything?
You know, it was very different back then. You had, I compared a lot to the UFC in the very beginning. Mm-hmm. The UFC in the very beginning was style against style. Right. You literally had boxer that would fight a jiu-jitsu guy. You had a sumo that would fight a kickboxer. And it was like that in point fighting. You had guys that did monkey kung fu. They did monkey. Yeah. They would go into a tournament and they would fight a guy that did tang sudo or a kempo guy. So you had very different styles. Oh, no, so it was just, the points were 1 point, single points, and it was first to 3.
Okay.
So you had this, and there was sweeping. There was sweeping like you've never seen. There were back leg double sweeps.
That's awesome.
There was a guy named Percy Titsworth out of probably Northern California, I think, maybe Oregon. This guy would, Kiyoshi, Chuck Cordova, he would drive in, take both those legs out from under you, and your legs are up by your head, and your shoulders are now coming down and your head onto concrete. So sweeps were everything. Sensei Cecil was king of sweeps, and you were down. Groin shots. I mean, and a lot of guys didn't even wear cups back then.
Oh, man.
So you were, it was, and there were knockouts. There was a lot of blood. So there was no blood rule. If you got bloody, you just kept fighting.
Right. And
that's how that was. Intimidation was a massive factor because pain was a massive factor. So it was a really different time. Today, I mean, I look at it and it's great. A lot of speed, a lot of single shots. I don't know. I look at point fighting differently. I would like to see it evolve more than it has. I look at it and I'm like, it's just, I would like to see it a little bit differently, but that's me and that's how I go.
Right. Yeah, no, it's nowadays point fighting is a little more glorified tag versus like an actual fight.
Yes.
I mean, I enjoy it myself, but still, I would like to see like adding sweeps back in.
I agree.
That's karate.
Yes.
You know, it's karate. I get it's sport karate, but like adding sweeps, groin shots, like that's actual karate right there.
Yes.
I would like to see that added back in.
I think it would be cool, and I also think it would be it would give the spectator something to grab onto.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's hard to watch point fighting. If you watch it live, it's impressive. If you watch it video, it's not. There's something that loses translation there.
Definitely.
So if you had something different, I don't know. I just think it would be cooler. I would love to see more than, let's say you threw in combination. You had to throw a combination of 3 or 4 things to score.
Right.
Because that would at least lend itself more towards realism, and it would force you to use combinations and set up combinations, which is not the case now. Now speed wins.
Right.
And that's okay too. But it's just never, that was never something that I looked at and went, because I was all speed. I was speed, preternatural speed. And I had nothing else. I didn't have a brain in my head. If I couldn't get you with that blitz, I wasn't going to get you.
Right.
So,
Your whole family are just like bloodline champions at point fighting.
Yeah.
I mean, Sensei Conor, your son,
yes.
probably one of the greatest point fighters.
We still need to watch his videos.
Now I want to see Kyoshi Chuck's videos.
Yeah, Kiyoshi was incredible. He was a state champion point fighter. He was, I don't know how many times he got in the ring, but I think he won everything, I think, by knockout.
That's insane.
And Sensei Conor, we unleashed him nationally and started...
We unleashed.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did.
That's the most BA way to put it. Okay, sorry.
We did unleash him because here's the thing: to do national tournaments, it's very difficult just to go, I'm going to start fighting and expect to win. Because not that the judges cheat, they don't, but they're just used to seeing certain people win. So on a psychological level, they're just going to have that person win.
Yeah.
It's not because they're cheating, it's just they're used to it. And they're volunteering their time and they know this person, they're just used to it. So we knew, having Conor do this, we knew that we were going to have to come in with such force and violence unleashed across everybody that there was not going to be any chance of him losing.
Right.
We would have to prepare him and get him so over-prepared and unleash such dominant force upon everybody that you weren't going to be able to take it away from him.
Exactly.
And that's how we did. I did it because my husband worked 2 jobs, and so it was left to me to train him.
Well, he was killing everyone in the CKA, wasn't he? He was dominating.
He didn't lose for years. He didn't lose nationally for a year.
That's insane.
That's good. That's great.
Well, how old was he when you unleashed him?
Well, he started. So he decided that he wanted to do the Olympics. He wanted to do Taekwondo, and we wanted to funnel him into that pipeline. And he was very interested in that because you could have knockouts in junior Taekwondo. So he was like, okay, well, I want to do this. And so we got him through a few Taekwondo tournaments, and he just destroyed everybody because he was working with, his coach then was Dwayne Bang Ludwig. He was like 14. So we decided to get, if you don't know who Dwayne is one of the most prolific coaches in all of MMA, and he was one of the most successful Muay Thai fighters of all time. But we had Conor training with him, so Conor's kicks were unreal. I mean, he was busting people up. So when he went to Taekwondo, he won like 3 tournaments, and one of the coaches said, well, we want him to compete at the National Training Center, the Olympic Training Center up in Colorado Springs, so we brought him up there, and he just was destroying people. But I'll tell you, those Taekwondo kids, their cardio is like nothing else because they go 5-minute rounds.
Right.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if Conor can't knock you out, which he was knocking people out, which he loved, but still you go into those deep waters, he wasn't ready for that. Only cardio-wise, because he was knocking kids out from Minnesota, knocking kids out from everywhere.
Right.
But he was like, I'd kind of like to go into MMA, and I'd like to finish up in point sparring. So I thought, I'm going to train him like an MMA fighter. And so we're never going to lose. My brother John Hackelman told me once, he said, the key to all amateur athletics is cardio. It's only conditioning. It's the only thing you have control over. So he said, if you want to get Conor ready, you're going to have to make his cardio better than everybody else, period. So that's what we did. We made his cardio, and all the other kids that used to come in to train, all the Hormone Murderers Row team that we had, the Tanner Fujis, the Colton Perazaks, all those guys that were just Sarah Tamura, just make them. I mean, we had sleds. We had cardio bands. We had weight vests. I would take them and they would run up in Red Rocks. We would do the medicine with carrying, having 25-pound vests on. He was not going to be ready. So when we unleashed him, what I mean by that is he was psychologically and physically ready to wreak havoc on everybody, and nothing was going to stop him. He was ready.
That's incredible.
Well, with him being your son and you're training him, like what was the schedule like? What was his week like?
Well, Conor was homeschooled from the time he was in
really?
first grade into middle school, and then he decided there were no girls in our house wandering the halls, so he wanted to go to school. But when he was little, we did homeschool from 9 to 1, and then from 1 to 4 he'd train.
Okay.
Every day. He didn't have summer breaks, he didn't have Christmas breaks. So we just trained. So when he was 12, we started to really go on the fighting. And that's when he never lost again in the CK. He never lost after 12 years old. That was it. In Colorado, he never lost. Not even maybe twice as an adult. Once to Andy and one to you, Tim. And that was it. Those are his only losses since he's 12 years old, probably, in Colorado.
That's crazy.
I know, right?
Crazy.
And then we took him to the U.S. Open. Mm-hmm. We took him the first time, and he did not win. There were, I think, 50 kids in his division.
See, that's insane.
It was. He got blown out. He won 3 fights. He got blown out. The second time we took him, it's different. At least the way it was then. You have to fight 2 different tournaments. You have to fight in as a wild card, beat all the wild cards, and then you have to fight what they call the Elite 8. Mm-hmm. And then you have to beat all of them. And they're fresh. They haven't fought.
Yeah.
And it's like a tree. It's like you just keep going up. You fight and fight and fight. And then he won the wild card division and then lost going into the Elite 8 because his cardio wasn't good enough. Well, that third time, he was crushed that second time, just devastated. Mm-hmm. And we came home and I said, well, you got a choice. You don't have to go back. We can not, or you can work harder. And he went, how can I possibly work harder? And I said, I promise you can.
Yeah.
I promise you we can work harder. And that was the year that, he was working out probably 5 days a week. And then he was going to Garage Training Center. He was working with Trevor Whitman and Dwayne Ludwig. Nice. And also getting ready to start MMA. And then we took him back to Florida that third year. And it was like a hot knife through butter. He was just killing people. And Dwayne had him doing these jump spinning back kicks that I still teach you guys.
Yeah.
And so we were working this jump spinning back kick to the liver and kidneys.
Right.
And because at the U.S. Open they have chest guards, so we were like, this has to get through that. It has to get through the chest guard. When you hit them, it has to go so hard that it just reverberates. So we had to go through that. And then back then they also had a great division where it was a kickboxing division. He got to fight kids from London. He got to fight kids from Spain.
Yeah, I wish we did that.
Well, it's interesting because at the U.S. Open, which I think is the best tournament in the world by far, he had 60 17-year-old boys in his division. 60. And he fought in as a wild card and just kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And he only fought one person from the United States other than him.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
There were kids from China and South Africa and Japan and Korea. He had kids from the UK and from Ireland. It was incredible.
Where was this held? Was this in Florida?
It was in Florida. I don't know if it's the same type of tournament, but I'll tell you, it was so impressive. They probably had 50 rings running continuously from 9 a.m. until 7 p.m. at night.
And this was in, 08?
Maybe. I think, what was he? I think he was 17, and so this was 10 years ago.
Okay.
So, yeah. It was an impressive tournament, yeah, but for him and for me, if he was going to do this, he was going to be the best one. And I used to wake him up in the middle of the night. I used to wake him up since he was little and go, you will be the best fighter there has ever been. Do you understand this? And he would go, yes, Sensei. And then he would go back to sleep because I was programming him.
Right.
That's amazing.
If you want somebody to be, it's like I looked at Venus and Serena Williams. Mm-hmm. Their dad programmed them to be great. And and I really thought that my son would end up going the MMA route, and I just thank the Lord every day that he did not.
Yeah.
I do, because there was a lot of people wanting him to. There was Mark DeLigrati out of Boston. There was John Hackelman, Dwayne Ludwig, Trevor Whitman. I think they all would have loved to see him go that route.
Right.
But that's a hard route.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what happened there.
That's okay. I know he said he didn't like the person he was becoming just because of the people he's surrounded with. Just because of they were just all a-holes.
Doing the
Which
MMA
ones?
route, MMA route. Well, the people he was fighting, wasn't it? Because he said the mental strain of knowing someone's is
Oh yeah, that's right.
training to hurt me. He didn't like it or something like that.
He didn't like the thought of somebody else is out there to knock him out.
I think that Conor is a very, you know him. He's a very cool guy. He's a very peaceful, centered person, and he has spent so much of his life trying to be that. But there is a lot of MMA is hard because there is a lot of violence. It's the art of violence, just like us. Martial arts is painting with blood and bone.
Right.
And I've always loved that. But for Conor, even when he fought, he never had any anger. There were guys that would go after him, and sometimes he'd get pissed, and then they were done. But most of the time, he was just like, it's just business. It's just business. So for him, I think he would have been much more along the lines of, not physically, because he's nowhere near this great, but like of a George St. Pierre, who approached it as, there's nothing personal about this. It is just business. It's just what I do. But then you have fighters that are so violently centered, they have to be pissed and hate you to fight you, and he just never liked that. He didn't like it. He loved to train without the pressure of having to, I'm going to have to go in there and fight somebody who maybe hates me. That whole hates me thing was never on his radar.
I get that.
Yeah.
Something I would like to understand is obviously it seems like your parents weren't like you to Sensei Conor when you were little. So what turned you into oh, my kid is going to be the best fighter, I'm going to program him to do this? What turned you into that? Because you're such a positive and productive person.
Well, my parents were hippies. My parents, they were. My mom was a little flower child, and my dad was this super political, like an activist. And that's not who I was. I found martial arts, and that was everything. It was everything. When I found it, it was the great love of my whole life. But when I didn't see a person. My mother was not the person to raise a fighter. The woman who I saw do that was Gwen, and that's Sensei Jason mom, J-Dog's mom. She was by far my greatest influence as a parent, because I was so wild growing up and such a bad kid. Really, I just was like, I'm not going to school. I'm going to the beach, make out with surfers. That's what I'm doing. That's what I do. I'm not going to the beach. Rats in town. Motley Crue's here. I'm not going to school. I'm going to go hang out with those guys. That's what I did. I was terrible. Nobody had control over me until I got into martial arts, and my mom would call my instructors and tell them, get her in line, and then they would. But Gwen, she would sit there and watch Jason and Jackie, and she was so terrifying. She would sit there with her arms crossed and stare at them, and I would watch her, and I'd see what amazing kids they were, and I was like, that's what I want. That's the kind of parent someday I want to be, because I've known them since they're little. I used to pick them up from school.
Oh man,
they were amazing. And
Mama Gwen?
No, I've never met anyone.
She was remarkable, and she's passed on now. She was just a light in the universe. And I told her many times that she was my greatest influence as a parent. She was a roller derby queen. She was an athlete.
I know. I'm gonna show you some videos.
Yeah, Gwen was a beast and trained her children to be beasts. So we talked a lot about that. So I've read my whole life about martial artists and how to be great. I've read a lot about how anybody's great. I want to know how, because success leaves clues. And Venus and Serena Williams' father, Tiger Woods' father, these people fascinated me because Ronda Rousey's mom, because they saw something in their child, they recognized something, they saw a spark, and they were able to ignite that spark. Conor wanted to be great so badly, but anything he wanted to be great at, I was there for him. When he wanted to go into archaeology, I mean, we used to go. I found the guy to do that with. This guy that was on TV, Bob Bacher, Dr. Bob. He was on this show called Bonehead Detectives, and Conor, I met him and found him, and we used to go digging with him up for dinosaur bones in Wyoming. And we found people that if he was passionate, I would foster that passion. Right. Luckily, when he was passionate about martial arts, that was my wheelhouse, and I knew how to get him where he wanted to be.
Yeah.
But I've always had that Heraclitus creed.
Yes.
Out of every 100 men, that quote.
Yes.
That's it. You be the one. Why not? If somebody else could be the one, you can be the one. There's nothing stopping you. You just need to find the right people to build that bridge, and then you walk across that bridge.
Right.
At least that's what I felt.
It's amazing.
Love the creed.
I love the creed. I want to get tattooed.
I've always thought about that, getting that tattooed.
Get down like the ribs. I don't know.
I hope that's not your first tattoo, man. The ribs are painful.
Hopefully. See,
Yeah.
like I want to make it in the MMA career. If I make it as a UFC fighter, I'm covered.
Okay, first you have to think about it like this. You cannot say, when I make it as a UFC fighter. First, you have to fight local shows. This is what I always admired about my kid, and about my husband too. They fought not because for the glory, had nothing to do with that. They fought because it burned within them. I mean, it was burning. If you're doing it for the glory, if you're doing it for the prestige, if you're doing it because you want to be a badass fighter, you're going to have a long road, dude. Because just like the Muhammad Ali quote, that all the work is done long before you ever get into the ring and you do the dance under the lights. Because you have to train. Your food has to be right. Your training has to be right. Your sleep has to be right. There can be no mental slips. There can be no judgment that's not curated as far as fighting. This is what you do. This is who you are. This is all you are. And you dedicate yourself to the warrior's code. You dedicate yourself to the warrior's quest. And that's what makes the greats in anything great, is complete and total dedication to what it is that they're doing. That's it. There is nothing else. That's all they see. That's all you ever have to see.
Yeah, man.
You're the greatest.
And even then, people have slip-ups. I mean, you have people that may have been... I can look back on the rec careers of incredible fighters, and one thing, there was one slip, there was one injury, there was just one thing, and it's usually an injury, or they've gone off and I'm a badass, I'm going to start partying all the time, and it will screw you up, and then it's done.
Yeah.
It's absolutely done. But it is a relentless pursuit of single dedication. And it has nothing to do with fame. It's got nothing to do with the UFC. If you want to be a fighter, then you dedicate yourself to be the best possible fighter. It's got nothing to do with TV. It's got nothing to do with the girls. It's got nothing to do with being on the cover of ESPN magazine. It is only dedication to the quest. And that right there is the journey. That's how George St. Pierre, the greats, Chuck Liddell, it was only dedication. It was complete dedication to that. And nothing was going to stop them. And that means if you have to get up every morning at 5 and run because you have to go to work, then you go to bed at 8:30 and you get up and run. And you have to, I can't tell you how many times it was just Conor and I, just down here. Tim used to call me. He texts me, what do I do? He used to train alone. 90% of the time he was alone. Now that's how I knew that he was going to be good, that he had talent. But there could be other times when you just come up against somebody who's your kryptonite. And that particular day, in that particular fight, you lose. And that could change everything.
Mm-hmm.
Does it change your dedication? I don't know. Maybe if it does, you're not the fighter that you thought you were. Or
that discipline.
quest.
That discipline.
Baby, it's all discipline. That's why I always say you got to get that black belt, because if you don't have the dedication for the black belt,
yeah,
can't make it.
Well, yeah, if you have to have anything you pursue, you've got to pursue with 1,000%. There can be no slacking, especially when it comes to your blood and bones, because that's what it's about in fighting. It's the art of blood and bone.
That's a senior quote right there.
I like
I'm gonna
it.
write that one down. I like that. That's amazing.
Well, we paint in that. We are martial artists, and our medium is blood and bone.
yes, I love it.
That's kind of how that goes.
Yeah, man.
Well,
So we're coming up on 35 minutes.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the camera keeps cutting on and off, so it's going to be
Good.
hard.
Yeah.
Oh. You're good.
As long as I don't want to be on camera.
Damon.
Me?
Hothead.
All right, well, that was Karatekast episode 4 with the amazing Kyoshi Carol, who is a complete she-beast and terrifies me sometimes.
I like that.
She beast.
Yeah.
I'll get that tattoo. No, I won't. But that's pretty cool.
Well, thank you very much. No,
You're welcome.
It's amazing. I love hearing when you tell stories and you speak.
So many.
You and Kiyoshi.
Well, I'm glad.
You and Kyoshi Chuck. Both are Kiyoshi.
One of these days you'll get him on here. One of these days get Conor on here. Will he just be a big goof with you guys?
Probably.
Both.
You know, he doesn't talk about himself. He really doesn't.
I know, yeah.
And he's got crazy stories backstage at the, you know, when Chuck Liddell got inducted in the Hall of Fame. He was backstage with Vanderlei Silva. Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
He was.
My idol.
I know.
That's
He was
correct.
backstage with Vanderlei. And just hanging out. And but it's his life. So
Right.
he doesn't think about it as anything but his life.
He
But yeah.
lived his best life, that's for sure.
Yeah, now he's like, peace out. I did it.
At 25, he's done everything he wants. Now he's just married, happy, teaching karate. Amazing.
Kind of is.
Well, can we put your Instagram and the Facebook in the
Yeah,
description?
yeah, go
All
ahead.
right, go follow Kyoshi Carol's.
And it's My Gypsy Soul 22.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Hothead, Flash, Kyoshi Carol, do it.
Karatekast out.